Greetings Titans, welcome to the news desk. I'm Dave, this is Dave Takes It On. Well, which legacy auto is producing more CO2 than the UK and even more than every single oil giant? VW is closing ice factories, sacking ice workers, while handing $5 billion to Rivian, who themselves lost over $5 billion last year. Europe backs down on tariffs for Tesla and Chinese Geely. They think they might have tried to charge them too much. Well, before we get started, we just want to say a very quick thank you. Big thank you to everyone for your support in reaching 10,000 subscribers. We'd like to say an even bigger thank you to our Patreon members. Thank you. Well, exactly as I predicted on this channel, Europe is backpedaling at a rapid pace. From a simple imposed tariffs on all Chinese imports or any imports that have a percentage of Chinese in them, they now think they may have gone too far. In a show of, well, who's got the biggest whatever, they state now that if you come and beg and plead with us, we probably might just listen to you and change it. Tariffs on Tesla are now down as a result of talking, from 9% to 7.8%, and Geely from 19.3% down to 18.8%. Well, these are additional to the 10% import tariff on all cars into Europe. But because SAIC have refused to kowtow to Europe, they will pay the maximum top rate, believed to be now, it's about 35.3%. BYD didn't seem to bend the knee quite enough for Europe, so their rate remains the same. But none of these are any consolation to the likes of Renault, who in some cases don't even use Chinese components, but they insist on killing off all their own sales with their own pricing. Take the launch price of their massively overhyped Renault 5e. It's smaller than Renault Clio in length, width and boot space, and a mere 60 millimetres taller. They launched this at €33,000. In contrast to Chinese-made MG4, significantly larger, over 300 millimetre longer, 70 wider and 4 taller, which is currently on offer under 30,000, will possibly remain cheaper even after tariffs are imposed. Well, now Stellantis is panicking and even threatening the UK with pulling out if the Labour government does restore the 2030 ban on new ICE cars. Well, hypocrite, you're the one that's screaming for extra tariffs while at the same time you are negotiating with several Chinese EV companies to make and ship parts to Poland, where you happen to have a factory that's long since past its sell-by date, sitting idle, and you can assemble them there so you can thereby avoid the tariffs that you are demanding. Well, Tesla, meanwhile, is not relying on China for its batteries. It is the single biggest customer of CATL, but it also has contracts with Panasonic and LG, and of course they make their own. Well, it would be a toss-up if the price of the new Shenzhen high-power, ultra-rapid fast-charging batteries from CL are cheap enough and the performance superior enough to consider leaving them in and taking the hit on the reduced tariffs. I'm thinking it probably should be. I mean, what's a few extra thousand if you can get much longer range and unbelievable 10% to 80% charging in a minuscule 10 minutes and up to 100% in 15? Well, the big story of the decade is the pollution that legacy auto factories add to this one planet that we live on. Climate and Capital Media has just looked into this for us, and the results are perfectly shocking. I quote here, ICE car companies are significantly underestimating the lifetime emissions of their vehicles, and investments in car makers can be more carbon intensive than investments in oil companies. They call this the damning report. Let's have a look a lot deeper into this. Legacy factories have made virtually no previous effort to adding renewable power with less pollution, and only really started quite recently to get interested once the price of solar power dropped. In contrast, companies like ABB, that's the charger manufacturer which has a factory in Germany, was one of the pioneers. One factory is already virtually off-grid, often produces excess electricity for the grid. We know of them obviously as an EV charging company which makes and supplies chargers to GridServe among others. Well, contrary to popular belief, a modern ICE car has a very unhealthy demand for cobalt. Wonder why all the EV haters and deniers forget to mention that fact. Oh yes, as is making smartphones like that iPhone or smartphone you're probably using right now. Not only the phone, but obviously also the battery. Yeah, they need cobalt to get the power density high enough so they can make you a really nice slim phone that slips conveniently into your pocket. Don't mention that very much either, do you? And the making of silicon chips is also hugely destructive. And yes, I recognise that applies to EVs. ICE factories are filthy places in their own right, but of course it is their products they very conveniently forget about when claiming factory cleanness. It's been discovered, or should we more accurately state, no longer hidden, that legacy auto are huge polluters. How huge? I'm really glad you asked me that, because Toyota, VW and Stellantis combined are the source of more CO2 than, wait for it, no, not any of the oil giants, not cement factories, not even the massive data centers springing up that create the AI. No, the total is higher than the sum total emissions of the UK. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I stopped too soon. Higher than the total emissions of the UK, France and Italy. Wow. Plus, when they invest in expansions, new models and new factories, they are more carbon intensive than investments in oil companies. But it keeps on getting worse. I'm going to introduce you to the term Scope 3. Let me quote. Scope 3 emissions are the result of activities from assets not owned or controlled by the reporting organisation, but that the organisation indirectly affects in its value chain. An organiser's value chain consists of both its upstream and downstream activities. Well, if you add up the emissions from their factories, plus from their products, i.e. ICE cars, you should also add in downstream and upstream sources. This would include suppliers to the factories and then dealers who operate showrooms and servicing functions. The report finds that when Scope 3 emissions are included, some automotive companies generate more emissions than entire G7 economies. That's one company more emissions than an entire G7 economy. It gets still worse because some are worse than others. Investments made, for example, by Ford and Stellantis to improve manufacturing are 3 times more carbon intensive than investments made by ExxonMobil and Shell. And the report also states a lack of global standards on car models segments means reported vehicle efficiencies differ significantly from real-world efficiencies. Does this not remind you of Dieselgate falsifying or manipulated the reporting data? Oh, it is exactly that. Well, here's one way to cheat. If a legacy auto company states it has a net zero target by 2050, it scores high. But that net zero target may be contrary to what the company is actually doing. One might set a really ambitious 2050 net zero target, but then abandon EVs altogether, go back to making ICE cars while lobbying the governments to abandon their 2035 targets to ban the sale of new ICE cars. It's all talk. Now, in all this, I'm hugely pragmatic. We cannot ban all cars tomorrow. The world would stop. Nor can we stop all additional pollution in any form. Every single thing that we do has an impact. Dig your garden to plant some pretty flowers. You might kill some worms, some insects, and you might upset the delicate local balance that existed before. Or on a wild camping trip, you might go down and have a pee in a local river or stream. In and of themselves, these are trivial. But if builders dig up thousands of acres for housing or motorway extensions, that total effect is definitely not trivial. Nor is it trivial if a local water utility dumps the sewage of many hundreds of thousands of people into a small river that just can't handle it. So my philosophy is simply moderation. Avoid whatever you can, minimise all that you can, and avoid totally non-essentials that have a massive impact. That's pragmatic. So a quick look at Legacy Auto shows that there are far more targets than action. More targets that do not match the stated aims of the parent company. So I throw this challenge out to all of you, the viewers. Research anywhere you want and see how many can match this following company. Send your findings to me in the comments below. I'm going to start the ball rolling. You guess who? Yep, Tesla. Okay, this is Tesla. I'm not going to go into big detail, but they do have a plan. They have multi-facets within the company for dealing with pollution and emissions, and they are already a net producer of clean green energy. Now we're going to finish on VW, Volkswagen, and its woes and financial tribulations. Well, they get great credit from me for trying to do the right thing a while ago. Rather, some people in VW get the credit. See, Volkswagen was an early adopter of EVs with the Golf from 1976 onwards, before joining the mainstream with the, at then, proposed introduction of their ID range. And I had great hopes for them, but then Herman Diess, as CEO, dared to suggest that they go all in on EVs and become world leaders in their classic range of small and family-sized, cheap but well-made cars. He got sacked. And ever since, VW has been heading back to ICE at a cracking pace. They never got to mass production of their EVs, where the price per unit would tumble and they would actually begin making a profit on each car they sold. They went all in back with ICE. At the time, their single largest export market, China, switched to buying EVs only. Half their turnover and half their profit is now just going down the drain rapidly. And with that, they drop out of previous ICE mass production levels, meaning their cost per unit increases just when they're selling less. And before you contradict me with overall figures, just break them down for yourself. Overall sales virtually static, despite big rises in North America, Western Europe, because of a massive decline in ICE cars exported to China. Offset overall by a massive drop of EV sales in Europe and an equally massive increase in EV sales to China. That's up 45%. But the latest news is all bad. They can see the writing on the wall. They have huge ICE factories that are now operating on skeleton crews, others on single shift, as more and more countries adopt EVs. Think about Norway, Sweden, they're now 100% all EVs, no more ICE car sales for them. Others like Europe and most of Europe and UK, they're already more than 20% EVs. Or in plain English, the ICE market is down more than 20% already and falling. Costs are rising and they face an almost impossible task. How can they shut down their idle factories and lay off the staff when the unions are just so powerful? It's not an easy route, and the first closures are now scheduled for early 2025, subject to no mass countrywide strikes and walkouts, or maybe even with them. But the latest way out for Volkswagen is to take some of the rapidly shrinking cash on hand and give 5 billion of it to Rivian, which purely coincidentally also lost just over 5 billion last year, 2023. This is VW's big get out of jail, well no, it's rather stay out of jail card. For both, Rivian is also reaching a tipping point. Yeah, they have cash on hand at the moment, thanks to generous investors like Amazon and BlackRock. But their patience is running out, and many predict that Rivian has little more than a year to turn things around before they begin to see their funds withheld. Well, VW and Rivian are like two old folks, each leaning on the other for support or they would fall over. Each actually desperately needs the other to survive. But it's never that easy. See, Rivian is effectively EV only with a wealth of experience in new tech, new ideas, new processes, while VW are still firmly 1.5 feet into ICE, but wanting desperately some compelling high-tech EVs, as long as they're not too much trouble. Whatever happens, I wish them both well. Rivian's going through what Tesla did about 8 years ago when they were on the verge of bankruptcy for the second time. Who said production is hell? You can have all the great ideas in the world, even great products, but getting them into production at prices that buyers demand and profit margins that you need is sheer hell. Well, perhaps Oliver Bloom, the current CEO, is looking back and wondering if getting rid of Herman Diess was the best move at the time. Well, it certainly got him his job, but a shed load of more problems than he anticipated. Well, in my opinion, Rivian has an average to good chance of getting through this and going on to better things. VW, they're going to have to lose an awful lot, change an awful lot, and set off in a totally different direction to get anywhere near that average to good chance of surviving. But I take heart in Nokia. Yeah, they were once the largest mobile phone manufacturer in the world by far, and they lost a lot almost overnight. But it's a more complicated story than just losing to smartphones. They'd also drifted in their production away from their core business, and they'd introduced a myriad of different products, operating systems, designs, colours, specs, everything, most of which were in very short production runs, and each of those were losing money. Remember Apple before Steve Jobs came back? Well, Nokia today has actually restructured, rebuilt and reappeared as a world leader, just not in mobile phones. In fact, mobile phones are just a part of the very much bigger new Nokia. Can Oliver Bloom and VW do the same? I'm Dave.